Being successful in business is about making good decisions at the right time in the right place about the right things. And today we're going to talk about when do you make decisions and how far forward should you be looking in your business in order to make the right decisions. And we have an expert with us here on the Wealth Ability Show today, Pat Alacqua. Pat, welcome to the Wealth Ability Show.
Hey Tom, how you doing? I appreciate the invite. Looking forward to it.
So, Pat, if you would just give us a little bit of your background. I mean, you wrote the book, Obstacles to Opportunity, Transforming Business Opportunities into Triumph. I love that. What is your background and, why this particular topic?
I guess, Tom, I guess, I'll give a quick overview for you, and I'll take it back uh, to my beginning, I guess. I grew up around small businesses. My grandfather had a little grocery store in a small blue collar town in South Jersey. Okay. And my dad worked there. My mom worked there. She helped out. And during the summers, she also managed a little tiny motel that my grandfather owned at the Jersey Shore. And these were not big operations. They were sort of like, it was just a family making a living, if you know what I mean, right? And by the sixth or seventh grade, I was down the shore every summer working at a public pool, not swimming but working, and they also rented bikes there, so I had a job there, and I was up at I was always around work ethic, I think, around my family. I guess probably that's where I modeled it. So I was, when I got this job, I was up at 5 a.m. I had to be there somewhere around 6 o'clock in the morning. I worked probably to 7 o'clock at night, so I had an 80-hour week. I worked probably 6, 7 days a week. And, what stuck with me wasn't just the work ethic modeled by my family. I think I started paying attention to how things worked, right? And my wife still, I drive her crazy today, but at the time, I walked the boardwalk, into a t-shirt shop as an example, and I'd think, geez, how do they make money? What's it take to run this thing, right? And I can remember that back to my earliest years, and that curiosity never left me. And my wife would say she wish it did, because wherever we go right now, I'll walk into a place and I'll just do the same thing. It's the way I'm wired, right? It's sort of my fun, if you hear what I'm saying. So, but anyway, to fast forward, I guess eventually I skipped college. I jumped into business, with that kind of a background. It was like, we didn't have a lot of money growing up. So I think I always had this thing in my head where I wanted to go make money, and I was always around business. Of course, as we all learn, you sort of, my definition of success changed as time went on. But in that early stage, I just wanted to get out and make some money. So my cousin and I started a little residential concrete business. No clue what we were doing. We were just figuring it out as we went. I had an uncle who'd been through it. He was a finisher was a concrete finisher in the Union there in New Jersey, and he helped us avoid some of the landmines. And that was probably the first time I saw how to learn from someone who's already walked the path, that you're on, right? So that idea stuck with me. So again, to fast forward quicker, a few years later, I co-founded a trade show services company. We eventually grew it into the early stages of a global business where we were servicing customers not only nationally in the United States, but also, in some other countries. And that experience sort of was a crash course in everything, right? Leading through chaos, building systems, dealing with big competitors who we were carving out a new niche in that industry. And there were big competitors who just frankly didn't want us to stay in business. So we were, tackling those kind of challenges, and we made a lot of mistakes. But we figured out things along the way and eventually built a great management team and turned it over to them and sold the business. Left that, and I'm almost getting to the end, Tom. And jumped into something totally different, a youth sports business, where I bought, I and a group of investors bought a struggling academy, in a local Atlanta suburb. And it was a turnaround. We reworked the model, got some national recognition, and before long, other companies were sort of copying what we were doing. And that's sort of where it really hit me, sort of my whole journey coming forward and reflecting on it, that the challenges I kept facing, they weren't industry specific, right? They were growth challenges, leadership challenges. And that's what pulled me into sort of what I do today, right? Where I just really try to, work with leadership teams that are in that challenging middle, right, Tom? As you know, it's like where things are working, but they're not quite the way they used to be, and it's like, your business starts to outgrow the way you build it. And I work with startups, or I'll work with, any kind of situation that makes sense where I can add value. But the sweet spot I love is sort of that figuring it out, where what's been working's not, and how do we have to think differently, plan differently, and execute differently, if you will, to get to that next level and move towards a more sustainable business.
Well, I love the stories. I'm the same. I grew up, my father, grandfather, and great grandfather were all entrepreneurs. So I understand that, that mindset, it just becomes part of you. And I love the way you've analyzed this and really simplified it down. And you talk about 5 stages of business. Can we just start there? You say that there's 5 stages. How would you classify those 5 stages of a business? Hi, everyone. Tom Wheelwright here, CEO of Wealthability and Robert Kiyosaki's personal CPA for over 2 decades. You're listening to the Wealthability Show, where we help entrepreneurs and investors make way more money and pay way less taxes legally. Before we dive in, there are 2 big opportunities I'd like you to know about. First of all, if you're a CPA, join me and Robert Kiyosaki this July 16th, 17th, and 18th in Park City, Utah at the Tax Strategy Conference. Check out the link in the description below. And if you're a business owner who's ready to stop overpaying the IRS and start using the tax law the way the wealthy do, check out the Wealthability Accelerator. Go to wealthability.com/bonus.
Before I jump into the 5, let me give a quick context, right?
Okay.
Every business, as you know, Tom, goes from an idea, right? And then it moves into startup phase, and then it moves into growth, and then it moves into what's called a maturing phase, where you either move to sustainability, or ultimately, potentially could decline, right? So at the highest level, I think that's sort of, whether it be a company or even a product within a company, that's sort of a life cycle, right? And so what I always like to say, though, is there are 5 phases. Getting back to your question, your 5 phases or stages that every business sort of goes through within that life cycle. And in my mind, what happens is every challenge we face comes from those 5 stages or phases, right? And the way we tackle them, or the way we have to think, we have to really identify what stage we're in, right? Or we could come at things in the wrong way, or keep using what's been working and not recognizing that it needs to change. So the 5 stages that I identify are that stage where, and these are in sequence, but yet, you know what, that things don't always work in sequence, right? Or you go back and you come forward. But the 5 phases that I identify are, you're focused on customer needs, right? And you're focused on that market message match. How do I communicate those needs? How I'm different, and am I really delivering what the customer needs, right? Then you have that next phase, which is the stretch phase, right? Where you start growing, and all of a sudden, your resources are starting to get thin. Maybe it's systems, maybe it's people, maybe it's, whatever it is, your resources begin to stretch. Okay. And then you get to that phase where okay, now we're moving, we're stretched a little bit, but now we've got to really put some management systems in. So you have that phase where, people call it the professionalization phase, right? I like to call it, you move out of that entrepreneurial phase, and it's got to be a blend of entrepreneurism and professionalization, right? Because anything in its extremes doesn't work, right, Tom? So I mean, if it's all entrepreneurism, once you get larger, everything's shooting from the hips, you can't run the business the same way. But if you move too much to professionalization, you choke the business, right? So
Right.
there's that fine line that keeps the innovation and the growth going. So that's sort of the third phase, that let's get the management systems in there. How do we think differently? How do we plan differently? And how do we execute differently, right? And then you get to that stage where culture's just been, it's almost been, you have to focus more on your culture, right? Because you got more people, and culture's always been the way a few people think. And and of course a culture is the sum total of all actions, right, Tom? But when you get to that stage where now culture's got to be more of something you really think about, right? Because you're bringing more people into the business, you got to make sure you're hiring the right people. You got to make sure that what you're communicating and what you're modeling to so many more people, because ultimately culture is the only way you can control a business, and to a large degree, right? The value system once it gets to a certain size. So you're focused more on culture, not to overthink it, but you just got to be more intentional about it. And that's the fourth phase. And then the final phase I always like to say is, and this really links throughout every phase, it is, how do you anticipate what's around the bend? How do you anticipate what's next? Right? And and if you're really putting the right, if you're thinking the right way, you're planning the right way, a lot smarter, and you got the right execution systems in, it's a lot easier to anticipate what's coming around the bend. And I always say to people, and I had a mentor say this to me years ago, and it really stuck with me. You got to have one foot as a CEO, but not just a CEO. I think any good leader in the business, you got to have one foot in the present and one foot in the future, right? And so by having that mindset, it really helps you identify, okay, I got to focus on this now because we got to get this done, right, Tom? But at the same time, I got to anticipate what's coming, because quite frankly, the more I can anticipate while I'm still getting stuff done today, the less the chaos is when I manage the change process, which is what growth brings. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But the phases basically are, customer needs. It's stretch. How do you manage your resources? It's your systems, your management systems. It's your intentional focus on your culture, and it's anticipating what's coming around the bend.
Yeah. So let's talk about that you mentioned, okay, you got to have one foot in the present, one foot in the future. How far in the future is that future foot? Is it just, in other words, one foot today and one foot tomorrow? Is it one foot today, one foot next year, one foot today, one foot 5 years?
You know, like anything, there's a science and an art to everything, right, Tom? So I think every company, every leadership team that's making their transition into, because every leader has to transform before the company can transform, right? Everybody talks about what the company has to do, and we're really talking about both today, right? But the leader has to make that transformation first. So, and how I answer your question is, I think it's sort of like, you know, for instance, when I had a coach, a mentor, start working me through this process in the beginning for myself, it was like, myself and my partner, we were so overwhelmed in today that it was hard to think too far out in front, right? And in today's world of uncertainty, if you think too far out, you might be wasting your time, right?
Right.
So So I think it is a combination of what you're ready for and what you can really handle on your own, because you still got to get done today, and how far can you stretch out your thinking? There's an art and a science to that. The art, I like to say to people today, have a vision. That's what the foot in the future is. Know what you're focused on now, and then at least know what your next few steps are, right? In that longer term vision. And if you really force me into an answer, I'd say force yourself in that 1 foot out in the future. Think 3 years out. I like to think 3 years out. I always say I got a 5 year plan, but what does that really mean today? What does 3 years mean, right? But the vision is more important, because when you really get it down to today, I think it's so important to manage the perfection of, how do you say it, paralysis analysis, right? Versus the ready, fire, aim method when we're doing things. And there's a fine line in the middle, okay, that ultimately says you do enough thinking and planning for that future, whatever is right for you and whatever you can comprehend. And there's management systems that can help you think even further out, which is another conversation, right? But in that process, what you're really trying to do is have a vision. What are you focused on now? What are those next few steps? And just trust that as long as you can embrace change, the pivots will reveal themselves, right? And start steering you towards that vision, if that makes sense.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. So I love this word anticipation, because I think that's the hardest part of business is anticipating what's next. And because you're not just anticipating what you're going to do, you got to anticipate what your competitors are doing, who your competitors are, what your customers are thinking, what they're going to. All of that requires your anticipation. In your experience, how do you see the future, basically?
Great question. Great question. Uh, you know, no, none of us have a crystal ball, right? Okay. So to me, the way I was taught, and the way I look at it is this. Think about this. Every company starts, we typically are managing activities, right? Then we move to learn how to manage budgets, right? Then we learn how to move to management by objectives, whatever that's called in today's terms, right? The really good companies, I think, answer your question, which is how do you manage by assumptions? How do you manage by planning assumptions, right? Okay, because and I have a system for that, which is not for today, but and it's an old system that was used in the old GE days when Jack Welch was in there, and it comes from some of the Drucker philosophies of management. Okay, and I always like to say I like to blend Deming and Drucker in those two philosophies, right? But but sticking to the point, you know, there's when you're looking at those assumptions, right? What you're trying to do is to say, what are the key categories in my industry for my company that I want to think about, which are planning assumptions? And, they may be the economy, they may be the political environment, they may be my pipeline, they may be what's going on with my customers. A lot of ways to identify it. But I think every company can identify 6, 7, 8 of those key assumptions. Within that, you start to look at what the trends are, right, Tom, within those assumptions. Okay. And the way you systematically work that is look at the trends and then start to say, okay, if trends are backward looking, if you will, through the rear view mirror, right? And what's a trend? It's looking at two data points and then evaluating that over a period of time, right? So if you look at that through the rear view mirror, you can look at that trend, and then you take the same thought process and look at it through the windshield and say, what do I think might happen with that trend? Okay. Now, of course, this is after you've decided this is who I want to be in my market until I decide to change, right? So you have a vision of what kind of company you want to be, but that begins to adjust, right? But within those assumptions, you look through the windshield and you say, okay, let me try to make some assumptions around where that trend's going. And then let me look at, what are my trigger points to take action if that trend gets to this point in time, right? It's almost like having a thermometer and a thermostat, right, Tom? Where you're looking at what are the indicators I'm going to watch, okay, and then what action am I going to take if this trend gets here because of the impact it's going to have on my company. And then in that thought process, all right, you start saying, okay, what happens if I don't pull that trigger? What happens if I don't take that action? So that's what gets you into, okay, nobody has a crystal ball, but it's better than working with a blank sheet of paper. And then you don't revisit that once a year, even once a quarter. I recommend you take 90 minutes with your leadership team and you do that once a month and you evaluate how that's working or not. And it's a constant adjustment, but you build it into your system. And that's one way also of teaching your team how to have one foot in the present and one in the future in a system that you can actually say, this is my crystal ball, and it's a lot better than looking into that glass that I don't know. It's a systematic way of looking at it, but there's a science and an art, and you're constantly adjusting and pivoting, but it's a systematic way of looking at it. Hopefully I answered your question, Tom.
Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges I find businesses have is success, because they get successful in what they're doing. And then the assumption, to use your term, becomes, well, that success can just get bigger, but that may not be the case, right? So how do you identify those barriers or those issues that might be creeping up on you when you're kind of smack dab in the middle of success? And your assumptions are, well, we're going to continue, we're going to grow, we're going to develop these systems. We've got the culture, we got the values, we're good there. And then something blindsides you because you're blindsided because of your success. How do you deal with that?
Oh, great. Geez, great question. I think I'd be lying to you if I said I had a perfect way to deal with it, right, Tom? But I think, like anything, it's you deal with that by anticipating it, not to use that term again, meaning, looking at things and every leader, especially that entrepreneur, that CEO, or that senior leader in the company, must understand. It's sort of like gravity. What goes up, what comes down. You got to understand that in order to grow a business, everything you do to get to where you got will not get you to where you want to go. Okay? You have to buy into that. If you don't, I don't know that you're going to be open-minded or prepared for anything, right? So I think it starts there. Even if you don't know your way, okay? If you, like, I've been taught to always look at things like, I don't know what I don't know. I have confidence, but I don't have the arrogance to think I don't know what I don't know. And I always start there, right? The curiosity, right? And I think a good leader in growing a business has to first buy into two things. One, what got me here is not going to get me there. Okay. And two, okay, that I have to transform how I think, plan, and lead at every single transitionary stage of growing a business. And I think if you have that mindset, that'll naturally, lead you to getting out in front of that. The last thing I'll say, Tom, so often we struggle with how to answer step 5 or question 5. Whereas if we start at 1, 2, and 3, 4 and 5 will reveal themselves. And I guess that's what I'm saying. The best way to answer that question is go back to that beginning and that underlying assumption. You got to buy into that. right? And if that makes sense. And then the last thing I'll say, Tom, promise I'll shut up, is don't worry about it. Have that philosophy and always worry about two things. Get started and then know that you're going to embrace change and you'll pivot. And if you just, every leader will recognize that those two things, it gets you unstuck because we all get stuck, right? So it gets you unstuck and it gets you moving forward. And if you're moving forward, it's a lot easier to anticipate what's coming than when you're stuck and all those problems stack up on you.
Thank you. So Pat, do you ever does it ever seem like you're always in all five phases? So, for example, your customer needs I mean, you've got to be thinking about that all the time because their needs change, right? The market changes, what they're looking for changes. I'm thinking about right now, for example, is a really good example. In my business, in the tax business, I heard somebody say just this morning, well, service industries are going to be taken over by AI. And if you're not using AI in that service business, you're just going to be left behind. So it almost seems like you've got to be in that customer need thing. You've got to be thinking about, okay, but I'm stretching. I'm going to be stretched. I've got to continually adjust my systems. I've got to, I think culture and values can be a consistent. I actually think that's the one that is the stability of the company. And then I've got to constantly be anticipating. How do you not get overwhelmed by all five of those phases going on at all the time?
Oh, great question, Tom. I think first of all, they can and they could, right? And I think, as anything, I think, building a business, it's just about managing change all the time, right? So I think that's at the core, and the change is in yourself as well as the business. So having said that, that's why, growing a business is messy. There's overwhelm, there's chaos, right? But I think if you understand those phases, it's like I remember in my trade show company, I'll use myself as an example. We did, you know, I could beat us up and say, I wish we had done a lot of things better. I'm very proud of what we did there, but growing through that, I remember I almost burned out when I was having to make that entrepreneurial transition because everything was stacking and it was a lot of things,
Yep.
right? And that's what creates the overwhelm in that process, right? And as good as we were at putting the systems in, I mean, at that time we were probably, and we were at about maybe 30, 25, 30 million dollars in revenue. Okay. And we had outgrown our systems. We were growing so fast that it had made that stage even more stressful.
Right.
Okay. But I think in anything, at that point in time, if the sooner you recognize some of the things we've talked about, the easier, it's never easy, right? But the easier you can manage that change. Okay. But I think even if it stacks up on you, the only thing I think leadership is about staying out in front. So I think you just, no matter where you're at, even if you're in that, where you're putting out that fire and you can't do anything but that, and it's the stress of it, find people. Hopefully you found them before that situation, but always find people that know where you're going, that have been there, okay, that can help you with that, whether it's people you bring into your company, whether it's people you access from outside your company. But just do the best you can and set your priorities and focus on what's next, okay? Because and you just got to dig your way out of it, if you will. But that's why companies, what do they say? Entrepreneurial companies, so many fail. If you've made it through a certain time, you could fail because maybe you waited too long to do that. Or maybe it just broke you or it burned you out. Okay. Or, it doesn't mean you don't change and do all the things that we're talking about. You just have to look at the stage and have I run out of time? Or have I run out of money? That's where cash crunches come from. There's no magic bullet. It's just, no, if you know what those phases are, you can do the best. You can do so much better in getting out in front of them. But quite frankly, sometimes if you wait too long, that's where turnarounds come
Right.
in. And then somebody's got to come in, or you've got to figure out on a fly, how do I turn this thing around, which is another whole level of leadership. If that makes sense, Tom.
It does. And I want to finish up by going back to the title of your book, Obstacles to Opportunity. What do you, if you could kind of, in your mind, what are the top two or three obstacles to opportunity that you find and when you look at different businesses?
Uh, you know, I think it's really everything we've talked about. It's when we look at that stuff it's it's one big one is that again, it depends on what stage we're coming in, but typically someone will call me and say, uh, I want to I want to grow. I want to get us to the next level. Okay. How do we do that? Okay. Or if, and they're successful. They know they're successful. Or it could be at another stage where they're having those growing pains of not getting some things in place. They're really a lot of pain, right? So when I look at obstacles, the opportunity, the book that I wrote and why I wrote it, it's one to help leaders understand everything we've talked about. One, you have to be ready for your own mindset change. Don't think, we all like to think we don't know it all, but when we don't know, we don't know. Trust me, as many years as I've been doing this, and I don't want to sit at a table where I'm the smartest guy in the room. That's the wrong place to be, right, Tom? So in that, the biggest things are to me, it's at the highest level is recognize that you must change and recognize how you have to change in each of those situations. Okay. And then in that process, how do you get out in front of it enough? Because you've got to turn around to your people and get them to understand the question that they're asking. This has been working. Why do we need to change
Yeah.
now? It's working, right? So I think those are the biggest things. And once you accept that, you can accept guidance. And quite frankly, you're smart, you've been successful, you can make that transition. I see people hold on to that too long. And then I see owners, CEOs, senior leaders saying, I get it, but they really don't. They think they're letting go, but then they either let go too much, okay, or they don't let go in the right way, and they're still controlling, and that's all part of that transition to that next level of growth.
Well, it's very hard to let go of something that worked for you in the past,
Absolutely, right?
right? I mean, it's what got you there, but like you say, what got you to this point won't get you to the next point. And I think that is one of the major lessons in business. What got you here won't get you there. And it's always changing. Your environment's changing, your market is changing, technology is changing. And the hardest part is this is, I think, where the culture and the values come in is that your employees aren't employees because they like change. They're
None
employees
of
because
us
they
like
don't like
change,
change,
right? Right.
right? They like stability. And so you have to create this sense of stability, which I think where the culture and values come in, while the tasks, even the individual tasks may not change that much, but where you are in the market, the customers you serve, those things may change. So again, the book is Obstacles to Opportunity, Transforming Business Opportunities into Triumph. And our guest has been Pat Alacqua. Pat, it's been absolutely great having you on the Weltability Show. If you could let us know where can we go to get more information about your studies.
Oh, thanks for asking, Tom. I guess two primary places. My website, that's patalacqua.com, PATALACQUA. You'll find some free some free content, like a lot of platforms today, but some free content, some premium, and also how I can personally work with those that I have the time to work with. And then LinkedIn, I'm not a big social media guy, but I love LinkedIn because people will reach out, and I just love to talk with people that are taking that business building journey. It's how I'm wired, and it's what I have fun with.
I totally get that, Pat. You and I are similar in that, and that I have a lot of faith in entrepreneurs. I truly believe entrepreneurs are the lifeblood of the economy and the world. And I think I would encourage everybody to go back and watch this again or listen to this again, because I think that when we identify what stage we're in or what phase we're in, and we can actually look at and anticipate, okay, what's coming. And I love that 3 years down the road. What's coming 3 years down the road, not what's coming 10 years down the road. We can't control that, but we can have an impact on what's coming 3 years down the road. And when we do that, we're going to make way more money and pay way less tax. We'll see y'all next time on the Wealth Ability Show. Thanks for listening to the Wealth Ability Show. If today's episode gave you a new perspective, remember this: the tax law is not your enemy. It's a roadmap. And when you know how to follow it, you can build real, lasting wealth. If you're a business owner or investor who's tired of overpaying taxes, the Wealth Ability Accelerator is your next step. You'll have the opportunity to work directly with me for 80% less than my standard rate. And I'll personally guide you through how to change your facts so that you can change your tax. Go to wealthability.com/bonus and apply today. Remember, it's not just what you make, it's what you keep.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.